Okay. Hello, Culture Power people. I know I say this every time, but I am indeed excited to sit down with author Netta Jenkins, who I met 3 years ago, met loosely on LinkedIn. I've been following her work over the last 3 years, so I'm very excited to have her on the Culture Power podcast. Welcome, Netta.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on your show.
Thanks so much. So you're calling in from where, Netta?
I am actually based in Rhode Island right now. I have been moving all around. I was in New York, then New Jersey, Boston, and now I'm in New York, Rhode Island.
Okay, so we're not that far from each other. I'm in Massachusetts, you're in Rhode Island.
Oh my goodness. I didn't
Yeah.
know that. Wow.
Yep, we're
Okay.
the Northeast girls. Also
Yep.
lived in New York. So today we're going to discuss your new book called The Inclusive Organization. But before we dive into it, kind of just give the listener an intro to who you are and how you came to write this book.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been in the DEI space for over 15 plus years. Although someone said the other day, Netta, you look like you're 9. I
I
said, I
was just
accept
going to
it.
say
I
15 what
accept it.
years?
We know what they say, black does not
No
crack.
crap.
So,
That's right.
but I've been doing this work for a very long time. My background is in behavioral psychology and communications as well. So I've always been very intrigued and fascinated by human behavior. Why
Mhm.
do we react the way that we do? And so I was able to create this work with all of the experience I have within corporate spaces, working with large enterprises and really understanding the barriers that exist for various demographics, right? But I think at the cusp of it, what all humans want to feel within an organization, and really kind of bringing that to life within the book. Um, Gosh, I am also CEO of an organization called Aerodi. So Aerodi is an inclusive performance platform that really helps to democratize and quantify inclusion efforts throughout organizations. And I'm just excited. I have a lot going on, but
You
I'm
do.
excited. And I'm also a mom. I
A
have two.
beautiful family. Beautiful.
Thank you, and a bonus son who's in New York. So really, just thankful for all of it, even in the chaotic moments.
Right. Knowing now your origin story, it makes so much sense why you do what you do and who you are.
Yeah.
But before we dive into that, does anybody remember Dipper? So Erudite, was it formerly known as Dipper? Because that's how I got introduced to you.
No, two separate companies. Yeah,
Okay.
two separate companies. So when I was working for an organization called IAC, which owns over 150 plus brands, used to own
Yeah.
Match. Um, I then at that time connected to someone that I was working very closely with, a colleague that became a friend and then led into becoming a sister, Jacinta. And we immediately really kind of connected and started to ideate on, hey, what can we do? But
Yeah.
what can we do for the community? What can we do for professionals of color to really ensure that before we get into organizations, we understand what the experiences are like. I think
Mhm.
oftentimes we focus on what the experience is like for food, right? The
Mhm.
experience is like if you travel to a different location, but why don't we take the time to really figure out, well, is this workplace truly going to be a fit for me, especially if I'm going to be dedicating half of my life
Yeah.
with the organization? And that's, we're always working, right? And so that concept was really around let's bring reviews to life for professionals of color. And so that's an entire separate company.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
So back to your origin story.
Yeah.
So, like many people that I know, including myself, you had a moment in your childhood where you started to see that separation, that disparity between how you were treated, how your parents were treated versus other
Yeah.
people. You had a traumatic event, like many, many little Black girls and boys do, and other people of color, where you're like,
Mhm.
whoa. Okay, so no matter how upwardly mobile we are, this is still the view of us and the perspective of us. So that's your kind of a very high level of your origin story.
Yeah.
This book, then clearly you had a reason for writing it in terms of like who the audience is, but tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what were you seeing that you wished you could have seen more of?
Yeah. Within the
Excellent.
book, I think, yeah, I think, just kind of starting back to some of the points that you brought up, you know, um, what I typically like to share is my experience when I was 7 years old. And I also unpack that within the book of watching a white woman spit in my mother's face and saying, Blacks don't belong in my neighborhood. And so that was really hard to experience because one, I knew I felt emotions throughout that time, but I was also kind of channeling my mom's energy in that moment
Mhm.
and watching her think, do I react? And we all know what that reaction can look like. Or do I just go into the house? And she made the decision to go into the house and pull my hand. And we never unpacked it, but I remember going into my room and vowing to never be silent again. And
Mhm.
so this is what really got me propelled in the work as well, because there are so many people that are voiceless based on dynamics in
Mhm.
that take place. And literally you're trying to think of, well, how do I protect myself, but how do I protect my family and the people around me?
Mhm.
And so this book is really it's a breath of fresh air, and it's also a sense of healing even for me in writing it. And so in writing the book, it was really about being super solution oriented.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because as I was writing the book, in my head, the audience is those from majority groups,
Yeah.
right? Then once my book was published and I started to read my own book and complete the exercises, and the first chapter is called Decoding Human Behavior, um, that really hit me hard because I had to start identifying, well, hold on, Netta. Yes, you identify as a Black woman, but what are some powers and privileges that you hold? When
Yeah.
have you used it? When have you used it? When have you not?
Yep.
Right. And and how are you pouring back into people? And so my mindset, I kind of repositioned my mindset. I was like, wait, hold on. If I'm in a room or if I'm in a workplace where it's, let's say, predominantly Black, identifying, well, what am I contributing? Right. Because
Yep.
now the dynamic shifts. And so this book is truly for everyone.
Yeah.
I thought I was writing it for, the majority demographic, but it is truly for everyone to implement these strategies within their organizations.
So from individual contributor to line managers, functional managers, C-level executives, everybody has some information they can get from this book. And I love the interactive portion where there's a workbook in between chapters and you can actually question yourself, because I think that moment of self-reflection, a lot
Mhm.
of us, I do this nonprofit. This Culture Power is a nonprofit. And one of the reasons it even started is because I was like, okay, so here I am telling people what to do. I've been doing this my whole life. What
Yeah.
have I contributed? Like how the problem didn't just get here because of the majority problem, right? It's everybody's participation or lack thereof in
Yep.
actually elevating certain people's voices.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah. And I
I
think,
love that. I love that you then kind of birthed something
yeah,
in that drove that level of power. That's awesome.
I hope so. I mean, I've been accused of virtue signaling and all kinds of things. And those things kind of get at you, but at the same time, you're like, I have to contribute something. I've had a fairly, like your parents, my parents are immigrants. They came here, worked really, really hard, gave us great educations. So
Yeah.
it's about, giving back and being part of a solution. So back
Absolutely.
to the book. The book has so it has some aspirational moments, I think, right? An org
Mhm.
who might have unlimited budget might say, okay, I can do this.
Yeah.
Now, what about the middle and smaller orgs? How can you tap? Because, as you saw this last year, one of the first demographic to go within companies,
Oh, sure. Mhm.
DI was just on the chopping block, right? So many good people lost their jobs this past year in the DEI space. Um, how are we going to then in 2024 speak to these smaller and mid-level companies about how they can bootstrap DEI?
Yeah. What I think it's really about is for even the smaller organizations to be super proactive in their approach. And I think for a lot of small and mid-sized organizations, they're like, well, when I get to that point where the organization is much larger, then we'll start doing this work. It's now. And it's the time now for organizations to say, okay, we may not have that much funding, but here's the percentage that we will dedicate specifically to driving inclusion based efforts within the organization. And so I think once there's that level of commitment, just like anything in life, once we commit to it, we dedicate time and we dedicate those resources, even if it's small, and we put a strategy together, we'll start to see some transformation happen. And so that's what I advise organizations. It's not for them to step away from the work and say, well, when I reach this level, here's what I'm going to do. It's, hey, let's put these resources together now, even if it's small. And I also tell organizations, it's not effective to simply say, well, this person identifies this way, so we'll have them be our DEI leader. You can do more harm than good. And I talk about that in the book, right? Or even just putting someone in that position. I have spoken to many DEI leaders that have said, hey, Netta, this is not what I wanted to do, but my organization forced me into this role. And because I need my job, I kept it. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't feel like I was driving efforts. I had no resources to do a good job. So it was, again, you see the inequities, especially within DEI roles. And typically you see folks from underrepresented groups that are pushing the needle forward within these organizations, yet they are still facing inequities within resources and budgets. And it's just not, it's not impactful.
Yeah, it's actually quite frustrating.
It is.
You
It
know,
is.
I
It
think that
is.
when orgs think about DI inclusion in period, they are only thinking about like ethnic demographics. They're not thinking about ability based and age and things like that. And would you then say, I want to have more people of a certain age group work here. Here, you person of this age group, you take this on. But it happens within ethnic minorities all the time. Oh, you're Black, you take this on. You're Asian, you take this on.
Yeah.
With no support.
Totally. And that's how come, going back to your question, I think what's really going to kind of push this work to the next level and what I see as the future is merging technology, and which is why I created Aerodie, because now it gives companies of all levels the ability to say, no, we're not just putting this on one person, right? Because that may be the innate feeling to do. It's all of us can take a piece of this action. We can measure the impact of our own efforts and see how we're driving them. And I always say, if you're working on a project and you can't see the impact of your efforts, you're not going to be motivated. And that's been the other barrier with DEI. There are not like those tangible things that you always see.
Yeah.
And so when you get leaders saying, well, what the hell is actually happening?
Yeah.
Right. In some cases, yeah, it's right. And so that's what really propelled me to create this platform, what I see as the future as well, merging technology with this work.
Do you mind explaining a little bit more what Aerodie will do or does?
Yeah, absolutely. So what Aerodie does is it provides every single employee with at least one goal, right? And it's really up to the organization to say how many goals they want and what cadence they want that to be. But every employee has a goal, and they're able to work on that goal and in real time see the impact of their efforts. Also, it's a gamified platform, so folks are able to have fun with this work. There's no reason why we can't have fun.
Right.
Work done, right? So there's a point system built in, and so it's a way for really organizations to recognize their people for the impact as well. There are ways for organizations to then say, hey, here's this population of people within our organization that's driving all this impact. Let's take a look at some of the transferable skill sets, what they're bringing to the table. Perhaps we push them into a different role. Perhaps we promote them, right? So now they can align it to succession planning as well and really recognize people in the right way. But really what this does is it democratizes the work and it quantifies the efforts. And it's something that, many organizations haven't been able to truly tap into because there was no software out there that had that capability. The other capability as well that we have, we just rolled out a feature that is a self-ID feature. And what I typically tell organizations is them increasing in representation has nothing to do, it shouldn't be about bragging rights, right? Look, we increased in representation. You're like, okay, well, that's 2%, but great, you're happy. What people want to know is, now that you know the demographic within this organization, how do benefits align to specific populations? And so within Aerodie, we're looking at caregivers. We're looking at some of those intersectional components, right? How many caregivers, of those caregivers who have pets, right? Maybe that's when an organization rolls out pet insurance. Do folks have children? How many? Like,
Yeah.
what's the average amount, right? How can you contribute to caregiving or babysitting, right? Stipend. So I think there's just so many elements. The other thing we see often is even folks within the LGBTQIA plus community, they're just grouped in one box when there are inequities amongst the entire group.
Yeah. Yeah.
So organizations really need to separate that out. And that's the other thing that Aerodi does. We even track organizations, what's the population of folks that don't have a degree that were hired, to the folks that do have degrees, what types of degrees. So now an organization can say, oh my goodness, 80% of the people here have PhDs. There's an inequity. What are we doing? Why are we just hiring people with PhDs? Is this truly needed? Or they can say, hey, 80% of the people here have no degrees.
Mhm.
That's something to boast about. You're an organization that's bringing people in, and you have folks in engineering roles, you have folks in marketing roles. So I think it's really time that organizations get really creative with the type of data points that they have and the insights to really take the actions that they want.
Yeah, I just saw research just came out maybe a month ago that employers are going to be looking less at your qualifications in 2024 and more in your ability to do the job, right? So like to skill test you basically. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
That's what they say.
That's what they
say. Like, it's funny because I read so many different articles. I'm like, oh, that sounds so great, and the aspirations behind it. But the reality is people are at the forefront of who they want to let in, right? They're gatekeepers at the end of the day, and those biases start to kick in. And that's how come it's so important for organizations to invest in technology and resources that can mitigate or eliminate those things. Because if they're just saying, well, we're going to look at skill tests. Well, what if someone knows someone? Now there's nepotism. Well, I'm going to just hire my son, but no, he skill tested and he did really well. Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
So I think resources are definitely needed in order for us to kind of move forward with this work.
So this brings me to my next question, and this is a biased opinion that I have. Okay. I've worked in companies, and I'm sure you have too, and seen they have it right on the surface. The hiring package is wonderful, right? But to me, there's nothing more detrimental to any employee, a terrible manager, a biased manager.
Oh my God.
Who has no checks and balances to show for their work or to explain why. They have the checks and balances for the strategy and the finance and things that have the hard numbers, but when it comes to the interpersonal relationships that they're either thwarting or building, there are no checks and balances. So can we talk about that? Because I think it is the most harmful thing that you can have in a company. So
No. Finish your thought.
I was going to say, what should bosses, hiring managers be looking for in these managers? And in fact, what should the C-level person who's hiring the hiring manager, what should they be looking for in that person? What should be a red flag?
This is such a great question. Thank you for this. There's so much that needs to be done. And just to kind of take a step back, you are absolutely right. It's one of the deepest barriers that exists, especially for folks from underrepresented groups, that like hinders the success in the most deepest way. It's a shot to your financial stability, how you put food on the table for your family. Like it really runs deep when someone does not have an effective manager that is forthcoming, that you can trust, and is really kind of being honest in their approach and their strategy to around performance reviews. I would say, number one thing is, before anyone is hired, and especially managers, it's so key that they are asked specific questions around how did you drive inclusion efforts within your organization? Just starting with a very basic question, because you find a lot of managers will say, well, I have 15 plus years, I have 20, I come in with 50 plus years or whatever. And you're like, well, okay, great. Well, with all of your years of experience, 25, 30, whatever, talk to me about your inclusive strategies. Talk to me about moments where there were dynamics on your team where folks felt like they were not being seen. How did you navigate that?
Yeah.
Talk to me about how folks were able to um, take it to the next level. What were some of the demographics on your team? Did you even know?
Yeah.
Right. And how did you go about rating performance? What has worked? What hasn't worked? How do you hold yourself accountable as a leader? And so those are all the types of questions I think in the infant stage and the interview stage that has to be answered. And organizations really have to have also an answer key, because anyone can say whatever they want, but it's, as an organization, you know what you're trying to align to alleviate bias from happening. So what answer are you actually looking for? And I find a lot of organizations don't outline that. They don't have the answer. So even if that person, provides a response, now it's like, oh, well, it sounds great. So there has to be alignment across the board. It has to start in the interview stage for sure.
Right. And then I think it has to be maintained throughout the life cycle of that employee.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's where the ball gets dropped quite a bit.
Yeah. And I also say to organizations, if you start to see that employees are leaving the organization under a specific manager, you can't act as if like that's okay. And I've watched that happen so many times at organizations where it's like, well, you know what? This manager or this leader brings in so much money, increases revenue. But then again, that manager had about 5 women that left his team.
And
Or that
potentially filing lawsuits.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
really,
yeah. Left the team.
yeah.
And all the exit interviews of all these people are saying, here is the reason why I left. That's when, when all those lawsuits come for that organization, I'm like, you deserve it. You did a great job. You did a great job, right? Because all of the data points was there. But as an organization, you overlooked it because you thought this person was bringing in so much from a revenue perspective, but you didn't also take a look at how much that person was also losing.
Right. Right. Having worked in that level of management myself and just hearing, and it's a very male dominated world still. I see a lot more women, wonderful, great, but it's still a very male dominated, I would say, mindset. And that takes me to my next, I think, barrier to this kind of work. It's relating the financial to the less tangible aspects, right? So, we've been functioning just fine. We are just show me how doing all of this is going to take me up a percentage or 2 or 3, right? So how do you address something like that?
Yeah. Again, I think it goes back to leaders being able to see the impact of their own work.
Yeah.
When they start to see, okay, I'm taking these actions and here's what's happening. And as a result, I can now see the uptick in profitability of the business. I now see that we have less turnover. I now see that I'm communicating more with employees and I actually know the people within my organization, right? Now they're able to assess that for themselves. Again, that's why I built Aerodie, because I don't want for leaders, especially executives, to continue to ask for the business case.
Yeah.
And they're asking for the business case because they're not seeing a tangible impact, right? And so now is the time for them to see it for themselves, but they just have to do the work within the platform to see that.
Right. And they have to start to change their mindset about what their expectations are for the business case.
Absolutely.
It really is a different way of thinking. It's a total way of thinking, right? So it's tied into clout. I mean, you could get repeat business from being a healthy organization in that way.
Absolutely.
Certainly the exit interview is very important when an employee leaves and then goes to Glassdoor and writes something about your company, right? So
absolutely. It's interesting. So I won't name this platform, but I just got approved to be on a specific platform, which I was excited about. My husband and I are looking and we're scrolling and I'm like, goodness, I don't see any other Black people. Like, where are the Black people, right? So I'm scrolling and they're on like the bottom of the page, but maybe 2 or 3 people, right? And so I thought about that and I said, well, I have to speak up about this. Yes, I'm happy to be on the platform, but why isn't there, 1, more representation? And 2, why is the representation that's there all the way at the last page? How are those folks going to actually be able to profit off of this platform that should be enabling folks to do so?
Yeah.
And so I wrote, the company an email, and they responded back. And one of the things that they started off with was, hey, as an organization, we're just trying to, stay afloat or start up. And I said, well, you will really be able to dynamically execute if you have representation. Like, the more people you have on your platform, the more you will win.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. It's interesting how there are people that kind of separate this work from what they're doing, because I'm like, if you only were smart, like, even if you're just smart, right?
Right.
You see that you would be able to increase your user base, oh my gosh, exponentially.
Yeah. Especially in this modern world where,
Oh my
people
goodness.
are looking for that kind of
Yeah,
thing within their.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
one stat that really hit me hard from the book is that it takes about 22 months to recover from being excluded. Whoa.
Mhm. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So there are, repercussions, physical, mental, emotional, from being excluded at work, where you're spending 9, 10, 12 hours of your life, to being excluded at work. So in your opinion and in your research, what else did you find as the most pernicious traits or habits within companies that really affect employees?
Yeah, I would say, I think the biggest one is folks not being recognized for the work that they're doing, dedicating all of that, all of their time and their effort, and then maybe someone else taking that recognition away, or taking, saying that they're doing the work as opposed to the other person. That was big. I think, while I was researching, what was really interesting and saddening to see was, there are so many hidden cases of folks that have committed suicide. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, have committed suicide at um, pretty notable organizations that we all know of, but they're hidden cases,
right.
um, based on like their work experience, the
Wow.
level of stress, or feeling like, damn, I still need this job. So I have to do whatever I can do because I have to contribute to my family.
Right.
And so reading that was hard. Now, I didn't put those points in the book. Um, but that was something that, kind of took my breath away. I
Yeah.
knew that was happening, but when I started to dig deep and kind of understand the various stories, and even these notable companies that, many of us, when we hear the big names, we think, oh my goodness, like, that must be fun. They're getting paid so much money. And
Mhm.
so even if someone's getting paid a lot, that still doesn't mean that, they have enough to take care of their entire family, So I think there's a lot of barriers that exist and inequities that exist for folks. And um, going into an organization where you're not valued, where you're not recognized, where you're not embraced, where you're not respected,
Mhm.
um, where perhaps maybe you're not even compensated properly, but you're just trying to save face and save your job for the sake of providing, that is one of the most detrimental things.
Right. Yeah, you had some great examples in the book, and I can't recall all of them now, but one of them was there are a lot of assumptions made about employees. The one of them simple, can you cover this bill and I'll pay you'll, get an expense report and you'll just be paid back.
Yeah.
And not realizing that that employee also has student debt, they have family responsibilities. So it just sounds to me, being in my business, it's just a lack of compassion for people, or
Yeah.
a lack of seeing the whole person, right?
Yeah, the lack of seeing the whole person. I think also organizations get into the habit of copying what their competitor is doing. And I
Hmm.
say to organizations, because sometimes they don't even do it intentionally, but it's, hey, here's another company of the same size in the same industry, and here are the benefits that they have. But I'm like, but your demographic within your organization may be totally different. Right? You
Hmm.
can have people that are still paying student loans, or you don't even know people's financial situation,
Yeah.
right? Based on the salary that you're paying them. But here you are saying, hey, go ahead, you can cover that tab.
Yeah.
You can cover $5,000. What if that
No, I
person doesn't
can't.
have that savings? Yeah. And that's what I wrote about in the book, even about me, as an executive at this large company, flashy company. You would think, oh yeah, she has all this money. And at that time it was tough.
Yeah.
Uh, so they wanted me to just kind of cover my work flight and all this stuff. And I'm like, I felt so embarrassed. So that was the other hard thing, because I'm like, I'm trying to figure out, well, where can I get this money from to at
Yeah.
least cover it so I don't look bad? I'm at this level. I should have this money in my bank account. The
Yeah.
reality was I didn't. And so I had to take that step, and I had to go through loops, and everyone knew the business, and so that's a lot. And companies have to be able to consider and understand the demographic and the population of people within their organizations, or else going back to what you said, that compassion will always be lacking.
Right. So back to how we started. We said that, there are going to be companies who are much larger and who have a larger budget to really augment their DEI and inclusion practices. And then there are going to be companies who complain that they're too small to begin, or too middleman to begin. What are the top 2 to 3 things, without giving too much away, because we want you to go buy the book, users, listeners, go buy the book, The Inclusive Organization. But what would you say in 2024? Here's what you need to do.
Yeah. I think in 2024, they can start off with just understanding the people within their organization. I tell leaders, if you have a very small organization, meet with every single person within it. It's going to take some time, but understand where they're coming from, what are their experiences, why are they even working at your organization, what are their aspirations. Start there, right? Because you'll end up understanding the full story of who the people are within your organization, to then start to shape strategies that will support the people.
Okay.
I think also then understanding that, there's a narrative about DEI right now. Throw that out the window.
Thank
Throw
you
it
for
out the
saying
window.
this.
Throw it out of the window, and really start working with your team to think about a strategy that can be implemented. And so even if it's, we want to launch a program that supports specific populations of people, or even if it's, hey, we want to start off with even just affinity groups, so that people feel supported, or a committee where we can discuss these topics and have these conversations. I think that's a start, but eventually every organization should really invest the time and effort, because we saw what happened after, the murder of Mr. George Floyd.
Yep.
Every organization was running,
Right.
to take action. In fact, there was an organization that I had worked briefly with before the murder of Mr. George Floyd. And then the HR person had said to me, well, Netta, I think we're all good. We're good to go. And I knew there were some things that were existing. And of course, they didn't do any trainings. They just left it the way it was. They didn't confront anything. And then the murder of Mr. George Floyd happened. And let me tell you, their workforce exploded. People started to share their experiences. Lawsuits were happening. They dropped in user base by half. The company doesn't even exist anymore.
Wow.
So, and so I tell organizations, be smart, be smart about this. At the end of the day, AI has not taken over yet. Robots have not taken over yet. You still have people within your organization. And so do right by them, understand the population within, and also understand the historical inequities that exist that create barriers for those that are from underrepresented groups. Because if you don't know, you will continue to project that within your organization.
Well said. Well said. I think these past couple of years have been an accelerant to a lot of change. And one of them is the expectations between employer and employee. Before this, it was all employer driven, right? You do this, and now employees are saying, no, my quality of life, I know anything can happen at any moment. So I'm kind of holding you responsible if I'm going to spend this much time here. Right. So I think being proactive is really the only option you have as a leader of a company to get it.
Yes, absolutely. Hands down.
Okay, well, we're coming to the end of this interview. It went by really quickly. What would you like to leave the listener with?
Yeah, I would love to say, you know, when you believe in something, you prepare for it,
Yeah,
right? And I think oftentimes we believe, but we don't actually prepare like it's going to happen. And that's how the inclusive organization, this book came to be. I started to prepare for it. I started right during my flight. And then a couple days or weeks later, I then received an email from a large publishing company. So I would definitely say prepare like you believe in what you're doing and make that investment within your organization as well to drive the change needed.
great. Well said, Netta. Thank you so much for your time. We can find the inclusive organization wherever you find books. Yes?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. And everybody kind of take a look into Aerodie. I saw that you went on NASDAQ.
Yeah.
Was it a month ago?
This was in the summer, actually.
This summer. Time flies.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
cool to watch those pictures of you and your family. Very big
So
congratulations
much.
to you guys. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye bye.
Bye.